Okay, let's continue chapter 4, where it's mainly concerned بالaggregate demand زي ما قبل كده قلنا covering mainly the main two components, consumption and investment. زي ما شفنا we already covered the consumption and savings part, discussing the various impact of the various factors that can affect or affect consumption, desired consumption and consequently desired savings on the individual level and accordingly on the national level. أنا بس I would like to draw your attention that you should take care of the various assumptions that changes from when you assess the impact of every factor and the other. Sometimes you assume that the output is given, sometimes we assume that the interest rate, real interest rate is given, sometimes the government expenditure and so on, or the government purchases are given. You have to keep track of this in order to reach the right result in analysis. Okay, and then we move to the investment part. We started in the same norm like we did in the labor part, where the firms decides the desired capital stock that it wants to employ or to use by comparing both sides, cost and benefit. Benefit as represented in the marginal, the future expected marginal product of capital, and the cost side as represented by the user cost. All this we is covered in the previous lecture or the previous set of slides. Okay, we'll continue remaining part in investment and then moving to the final part regarding the market equilibrium for goods and services. Okay, when any firm just buys or invests in any kind of structure like buying a machine, building a factory, building, getting a software even, we say that the firm is doing investment. But we don't know really if the capital stock increased over time or not. If we need to know الإضافة الحقيقية or the additional increase in capital, then we're talking about another indicator, which is net investment. So net investment is the change in capital stock across time. If we're comparing, remember in chapter 2 we already covered that, the change in capital stock across time, for example, the capital stock at the end of the year compared to the beginning of the year. If this is positive, then we have a positive net investment. We call it net investment, which is a more accurate measure of investment that shows the increase or the change in capital stock over time. But this increase cannot happen unless the total investment is larger than the cost of or the investment directed to cover the worn out capital or the used capital, the depreciation that we talked about. And again, this is the measure of net investment. We already covered that as I mentioned before. So it's just two sides. The net investment, which is a more accurate measure of increasing the capital or of investment, which shows the increase in the capital, the stock of the capital in the firm, for example, by comparing capital stock across time, or looking at it from which would never happen unless the total investment is higher or bigger in value than the investment devoted to cover the depreciation or the worn out capital. Okay, you can see from this slide, just writing down what I just mentioned, that the net investment is the difference between capital across time as in T. مثلا كأن T plus 1 capital and T plus 1 capital at the end of the year or beginning of next year minus capital at the beginning of the year.
When it is positive, we have a positive net investment and vice versa. But at the same time, the other side of the coin is that it would never happen unless the total investment, the current total investment exceeds the investment devoted or directed to cover the worn out capital as measured by the depreciation rate multiplied by the initial capital stock or the capital stock in the beginning of the year. Okay, so both measure the net investment. Both are two sides. One side won't ever happen except the other prevails. By simple manipulation, we can reach that the total investment is equal to the change in capital stock across time plus depreciation rate multiplied by the initial capital stock. احنا ليه بنعمل كده in order to understand the relationship between desired level of capital and total investment. We need to understand what are the variables that can affect, هو ده ultimate goal, what are the factors that affect investment. So we want to simplify things. We now understand that the total investment has main two components: the change in capital stock, and across time, and the depreciation or the investment dedicated for depreciation, to cover depreciation, to cover the worn out capital, as we just said. If we assumed for simplicity that the KT plus 1 or the capital stock at the beginning at the end of the year or the beginning of next year is equal to the desired, as if the company or the firm reached its desired capital stock, as we saw comparing both sides, the benefit, the marginal, it has this info, the future expected marginal product of capital and the user cost, and by comparing both and equating both, that the benefit exactly covers the user cost, and it reached the desired capital stock that it maximizes its profits, which is K star. So it's again simplifying assumption that we assume that the actual capital stock automatically reaches this level of desired capital stock. طبعا ده it's a simplified assumption because, as you know, that capital or investment, there's always that time lag. When any firm installs, for example, a new machine, there's always time needed for installation, to train workers how to use it. So there's always a time lag between buying the machine and putting it in, or the contribution of this machine in increasing my output and being fully in function. Okay, so this simplified assumption can will show us that any factor that affect the desired, we can with confidence say that any factor that affect the desired capital stock would affect consequently in the same manner total investment. And we took from the previous part, the factors that affect the desired capital stock are the marginal product of capital, and from the condition of profit maximization condition, the marginal product of capital, the future marginal product of capital, so technological advances, deteriorations, that can affect positively or negatively the marginal product of capital, will affect the desired capital stock and consequently the total investment. Also taxes on the user cost side, taxes, effective tax rate or the interest rates would affect the user cost, as we discussed before, and again this would be translated into the similar effect on total investment. In addition, of course, to the depreciation rate, as you see from the equation. Okay, this is again the same discussion that we were saying about the time lags, and there is always this time lag to reach the desired capital stock. Usually it is not instantly achieved, but we assume that for simplicity.
in order to understand what are the factors affecting total investment. Okay, this table summarizes again the main factors that we were just talking about affecting the desired capital stock that we again discussed in the last set of slides, the first part of the chapter, on both the benefit side, the marginal product or the expected future marginal product of capital, and which is basically affected by the productivity, the technological changes that affect the productivity of capital, like new innovations regarding the machines and new inventions and so on. And on the cost side, the factors affecting the user cost, like the real interest rate, the effective tax rate. Of course, those two variables, if they increase, this will be translated into an upward shift in the user cost line, which will result in a decline in our desired capital stock, and consequently will have a negative impact on investment. اوكي كل اللي اتكلمنا عليه انواع الفيكسد investments, the investment in structures like buildings, buying machines, softwares and so on, but there are other as you know احنا قلنا في this is the non-residential investment, there is also residential investments and inventory investment. Both kind يعني to understand how the decisions are taken to have more inventory investment or to have less, or to have more residential or housing investment, or to decrease it. It follows exactly the same approach, comparing the benefit side, the future marginal product of capital, the benefit side, with the cost side, the user cost side of capital. So nothing is there is no new way of analysis, so fortunately it follows the same way of analysis, comparing both. For example, in the case of inventory, like giving this example of a car dealer who wants to decide if he زي ما قلت لكم قبل كده, الانفنتوري is just like أوضة بنخزن فيها, either we pile up more cars or we withdraw cars if needed, if demand is higher than supply. How can he tell if it is in his own benefit to increase the inventory? Simply by comparing the marginal product side. The marginal product side or the benefit side is represented by, for example, increasing the supply, having the flexibility in satisfying the demand, increasing the commissions for selling extra cars, versus the cost, the user cost. The cost here is again the interest rate that is paid for the loan, for buying, for renting the place, for example, where the inventory is stored, or the depreciation. The depreciation, as we said, the part that is dedicated to replace the worn out or the used capital, or the yes, and in this case, for example, depreciation next year, العربية الموديل 2020 مش أكيد هتكون أقدم والفاليو بتاعتها أقل من 2021 مثلا. So this is the cost, another factor to add to the cost side. So whoever is doing the inventory investment will take the decision when the two sides exactly, the benefit covers exactly the cost side. Same for the residential investment, building apartment, it has also again positive or a benefit side in the form of rent, or a cost side by, for example, borrowing money, paying interest rate for it, the cost of depreciation to replace for this rented apartment, for this building, the worn out capital, the worn out, the used capital. This is a main also part of cost in this case. And again, this decision wouldn't be taken unless the benefit exactly covers the. If it is higher, then it is the benefit to increase this benefit, this in kind of investment till it exactly covers the cost. So exactly nothing new, the same manner of the previous analysis. Okay, now we will move to the goods and services market equilibrium. As you know, equilibrium is equating the equating between aggregate supply of goods and services and aggregate demand. لكن it's totally different than the identity. They both look like each other when we write them down. It's mainly the equality between the quantity supplied or the output, Y, the income, and the quantity demanded. But in order to differentiate between the income expenditure identity, as that we talked about several times, and the equilibrium condition, we can see that the equilibrium condition is denoted by the desired level of national consumption and desired level of national investment. عشان كده لما نلاقي كلمة desired, then we're talking about goods and services market equilibrium. طيب ايه الفرق بينه وبين الايدنتيتي؟ The income expenditure identity. Income expenditure identity is satisfied all the time, applies all the time, the equality is always there. زي ما شفنا through the changes in inventory, whether that through piling up or withdrawals, بيضمن لي guarantees the equality between income or output side and the expenditure side, the total expenditure side. Whether this piling up is desired or undesired, it is عملية حسابية لازم تبقى متساوية متطابقة. Okay, which is totally different than the equilibrium condition. There is no undesired piling up in inventory, and consequently aggregate supply can exceed aggregate demand, or vice versa. So we can have a status of disequilibrium, inequality between both sides. That's basically the main difference between the market equilibrium condition and the income expenditure identity. When the income expenditure identity, when it would be written without desired, without the notation desired, like desired consumption and desired investment. Okay. فمن هنا بتفهموا أو اتضح لينا ليه كلمة desired is there when we're talking about equilibrium, because the piling up of or the withdrawal from inventory undesired, it happens in the identity, okay, but only the equilibrium is the desired, the equating between the desired spending and output. طيب, with simple manipulation as we did before, we can reach that from the equilibrium condition, bringing the consumption, private consumption and public consumption or government purchases on the left hand side. We equate between the saving or the desired level of savings, national savings, and desired investment. Desired savings represents merely the funds supplied by savers, whereas the investment or the national desired investment represents funds demanded by investors. So if we're talking, كأنه في عندي two versions of equilibrium, and I'm talking about the same thing. Equilibrium in the goods and services market, either by equating the aggregate output and aggregate demand or aggregate expenditure, or it's exactly the same when I talk about equating aggregate savings and aggregate investment, desired savings and desired investments, as you see from this simple derivation. Okay, representing this graphically, هنلاقي ان savings curve is positively, الاثنين savings and investment, the common variable that affects both is the real interest rate, and we will see that both variables, the changes in real interest rate would result in movement along both curves. Looking at the saving curve, the desired savings curve,
we will find it positively related. لو تفتكروا الاناليسز في الجزء الأول الخاص بالconsumption revealed this. اتكلمنا على real interest rate and its effect on desired consumption and desired savings, and we saw this substitution effect and income effect, and we talked a lot that the effect is kind of ambiguous, which means that we couldn't really reach the result اللي كان عندنا borrowers و savers يعني please revise this part again, we talked about it in detail before. And we reached the result that the substitution or the empirical evidence الدراسات applied showed us that the substitution effect is stronger, where for example with an increase in real interest rate the cost of the current consumption increases, which means that we will lower the current consumption, and having a fixed or a given level of output would mean an increase in savings, in desired savings, and thus the relation between the real interest rate and savings is a positive one. Okay, whereas so that's the curve is upward sloping, whereas the investment curve is downward sloping, due to that in the real interest rate برضو we saw that it affects the desired capital stock negatively, being one component in the user cost, and thus when it increases it brings up the user cost, shifts it upwards or increases the user cost, and lowers the desired capital stock consequently, and we knew that the capital stock is directly related to the investment, to the total national investment, and thus it moves in the same direction, which means that it declines with a higher real interest rate. Then it is negatively related to interest rate or downward sloping. طيب لو ابتدينا من an equilibrium point equating both sides at point E, where both the funds available for lending and the funds demanded by investor are equal, the investment and saving, the national desired investment and the national desired savings are equal, then we are talking about an equilibrium in the aggregate supply and demand for goods and services زي ما شفنا قبل كده من السلايد السابقة. Any point above this point, then we're talking about or below this point, then we're talking about a disequilibrium status. What brings us back to the equilibrium is the movement of the real interest rate. إذا كان عندي case of excess demand, so I'm at the 3% for example real interest rate, يبقى الديماند عندي أعلى من supply, investment is higher than savings, or the demand for funds is higher than the supply of funds. This will bid the price upwards or the real interest rate upwards and going back to the initial equilibrium. And vice versa, if we're talking about higher supply of funds or savings compared to demand for funds, it will drive the price downwards back to the 6% or to the initial equilibrium status. نفس الحكاية بالظبط كأني if I'm talking about equilibrium between savings and investment, then I'm talking about equilibrium in the goods and services market. فزي ما نشوف من أول column which represents the output, the Y, and the very last column on the right hand side represents the aggregate desired spending, aggregate desired demand. بنلاقي إن equilibrium happens exactly when saving and investment between output and aggregate demand, exactly when savings and investment, desired savings and desired investment are equal. At a lower interest rate, we'll discover, like the 3%, we'll discover that we have a higher excess demand or a higher level of investment than compared to savings. نلاقي investment which is the fourth column, the desired investment 1,500 compared to 850, the level of savings, and that's why and at the same time consumption is also higher. دايما the savings with investment move in a different direction because the output is fixed. Remember always that the output is fixed. Okay, this will bid up the price زي ما شفنا في الجراف السابق, to go upwards, the real interest rate will move upwards to bring back the status of equilibrium. Okay,
لو حصل أي change في ال real interest rate, then we're talking about movement along the curves, whether savings or investment. So what shifts the curve? The other variables that we assume to keep constant, okay? And I think you're quite acquainted with this kind of analysis خلاص. طب إيه factors that can cause a shift in the savings curve? That all the variables that we discussed in the first part affecting consumption. ما احنا قلنا consumption and savings are two sides of one coin. So for example, a change in expected future income, change in current income, change in government spending, change in taxes, change in wealth. All those factors would result in a shift in the savings curve. اوكي طبعا في الدايركشن المظبوط. يعني مثلا لو حصل increase in the government purchases, ولازم نفتكر ان government purchases it includes, as we defined before, public investment and public consumption, whereas investment, the aggregate investment that we're talking about, includes only private investment. طيب هنفترض ان الحكومة زودت public investment which is included in the G. What would happen لو تفتكروا من analysis قبل كده in the increase in G resulted in a decrease in savings. Savings is equal to Y, which is fixed, minus desired consumption and G. So when the G increases, the savings, the desired level of savings will decrease. اوكي وشوفنا طبعا الاناليسيس مش هخش فيها تاني ان ممكن الكونسامشن يقل او ما يقلش, ممكن تبقى مموله ب increase in taxes or people would expect increase if not actual people could expect it. مش هنخش في الاناليسيس دي تاني, but please revise it. So if government purchases increased in the form of increase in public investment, we know from the previous analysis that savings will decrease. So the whole curve will shift to the left. يعني moving from S1 to S2 and moving from equilibrium, initial equilibrium E to the new equilibrium level F. لو بصينا عند initial equilibrium level هنلاقي ان في الحالة دي we have a case of this equilibrium where aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply, where investment exceeds savings. We are talking about the same thing, okay? Again, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, savings and investment are again two sides of the same coin. So لما aggregate demand يبقى أكبر من aggregate supply, or the investment or the demand for loanable funds is higher than the supply, then this will bid the interest rate or the real interest rate upward till we reach the new equilibrium level again. And by the same token, ايه بقى ال variables اللي shift result in shifting the investment curve. احنا شفنا ان we through the analysis we discovered that the factors affecting the desired capital stock is directly related to the level of national desired investment, which means that any factor affecting the desired capital stock would affect the investment in the same manner. ايه بقى ال factors اللي affecting desired capital stock؟ ورجعوا للتيبل تاني هنلاقي ال variables اللي داخله في ال user cost or the benefit, the future expected marginal product of capital. Okay, for example, depreciation rate, the user cost includes the effective tax rate. دول على جانب ال user cost. على الجانب الآخر marginal productivity of capital. If, for example, a technological improvement, or for example, due to, for example, the prevailing coronavirus, which will negatively affect the marginal productivity of capital, let's say the innovation will hold on, won't be experiencing improvement. ممكن يحصل shift in the investment curve, a negative shift. لكن هنفترض حصل a positive advances in technology, which resulted in a higher productivity of capital, result in a shift in the total shift in the investment curve to the right. Again, expressing a case of at the initial equilibrium level, it will be a case of disequilibrium where again investment or exceeds savings, again a case of excess demand pushing up the real interest rate upwards. التنافس على الكمية المحدودة من supply of funds will increase the price of the funds, which is the real interest rate, upwards, so till we reach the new equilibrium level. Okay, يعني this is the main points in chapter 4. I hope they are clear enough. If you have any questions, please send an email, or we can discuss it even on the Moodle, through the Moodle. I hope so. It will be working إن شاء الله. كل حاجة تبقى واضحة. Okay, thank you.